Good morning and welcome to your Hillsborough County MPO meeting. Sorry for the delay. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and Invocation. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our gracious and Heavenly Father, we're so thankful that you touch us with your loving hands to allow us to see another one of your beautiful days. We ask you to be with us today as we make decisions to make this county a better place for all of us to live, work, and play. We ask that you put your loving arms of protection around those that put their lives on the line for us each and every day, our first responders, whether in military uniforms or here on this soil protecting us. And we ask that at the end of their tour of duty that you take them back to their homes and find everything safe and sound. When our work is done here today, Father, we ask you to take us back to our homes and find everything in order. These are all blessed. We ask in your righteous and holy name. Amen. We're moving to the approval of the January 20th, 2020 meeting. Is there a minute approval? Is there a vote to approve the minutes? That's a motion by Commissioner Kemp, second by Commissioner Overman to approve the minutes of January 7th, 2020. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye. Opposed likewise. Motion is adopted. And now moving to public comment. I have two speaker cards. You have 3 minutes each. We have a timer over by the podium. You all know that when it touches the yellow, you have 30 seconds, and in red, that means your time is up. The first one is Laura Urena. Morning. Please state your name.
Okay, I'm Laurel Urena. I live in North Ybor, 33605 zip code. Just want to thank you guys for what you do for our area as public servants. I'm just here to speak today in opposition of the proposed ramp that's going to go on I-4. I am a small business owner. My background's environmental engineering. I live in the North Ybor area, and it is a historic neighborhood that was never designed for capacity that would be pushed on us from the addition of a ramp to I-4. I actually this morning recorded a video. I wish I could have presented, but the video is of the exit of a school, which is Academy Prep. It's a school that serves mostly lower income Black and brown kids that statistically have been forgotten. The exit ramp actually was plowed by a car that was speeding down 15th Street. So not only will these kids be more endangered by the addition of a ramp, but their air quality, I can speak to that, is going to be worse with particulates, with NOx, with VOx, with other things that have indisputably been increased with the addition of cars in neighborhoods. So I'm just coming to ask you guys to, as representatives of the stakeholders in this area and as a small business owner, I'm asking you to prioritize your stakeholders, prioritize your citizens, and especially those who are most vulnerable with the addition of cars and the never-ending expansion of highway infrastructure and ramps. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for hearing me, and I appreciate everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Chris Villa.
Good morning. Christopher Vella, 9241 East 11th Avenue, Ybor City, 33605. There's a white paper that's in your agenda today that I guess you all are going to be taking action on. To me, it's literally a stab to the heart, and just here's some Band-Aids to cover that up. Most of the walls in that report are not even in the U.S. They're actually in other places. They're very theoretical. We in Ybor, we in a lot of the CRAs, almost practically all CRAs, get walls instead of neighbors across the street. We get walls that take entire city blocks that are set back. We get retention ponds. And so my point is that none of this is really restorative to our neighborhoods when it comes to transportation planning and offsetting these damages. If you guys approve this, this could permit you guys to do large roads that go long places, and then you put up walls in urban areas that will hurt the city of Tampa tax base and also hurt a lot of the communities around. We don't want to look at walls anymore, and in fact, that's why we had Josh Frank come over here and talk about removing the walls and bridging communities. But we can also look at other ways in the interim to reconnect communities. The worst thing about this report, it talks about TIF funding. Now, TIF funding is utilized by CRAs. We have been instructed by City Council to really look at affordable housing options. I don't want the TIF funds, personally, I'm just talking for myself and not from the board, I don't want the TIF funds to go into a wall that for an interstate that put us in a CRA in the first place. That is ridiculous. So I don't understand why this is happening. We have TRB papers, which is the Transportation and Research Board, and Qatar that talk about climate footprints, that talk about transit. All these papers are nationally endorsed and looked at. And here we are, like, about to endorse a sound wall, which is ridiculous. I know the staff is better than this. I'm going to talk about the CRAs because, Chairman, you talked about economic analysis for the TBX. And Transite, the software that they use, it doesn't determine local impacts to CRAs. What it does is it looks countywide, and it says, well, if people like me on the interstate lose value in their property or get subject to health impacts, properties further away will offset that impact. So that's just not fair. CRAs have lost over 800 properties due to the interstate, so we have suffered quite a bit. You guys probably heard about the 14th and 15th Street exit. I can tell you that the YCDC isn't too happy with it. Ybor Neighborhood Association is not too happy of it. We want it gone. Currently, right now, you're showing 7,500 cars accessing that point. FDOT wants to put up to 29,000 cars there. I know the city is looking to put bicycle infrastructure. I don't believe curbs are going to be enough because a lot of the accidents that we're seeing there, cars are flipping over. They're going near bus shelters. They're going into properties because it's so fast. There's no visual acuity there, and it's just a curve. It just doesn't fit. The interstate talks about, am I almost done? Okay, thanks.
Okay. I don't know what happened to the yellow light. Okay. Is anyone else? Anyone else wishing to speak? Thank you. Now moving to committee reports and online comments. The first person is Mr. Roberts, Bill Roberts, CAC Chair.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the MPO Board. I'm Bill Roberts. I chair the MPO Citizens Advisory Committee. I give you a brief report on our activity for our January meeting. The committee had its annual meeting and election of officers. I am either pleased or sad to report to you that I was reelected as chairman for another year. Mr. Rick Fernandez was elected as vice chair, and Steve Hollenkamp was elected our officer at large. Those are our three officers. The CAC also reviewed its attendance report and determined that there are no declared vacant seats on the Citizens Advisory Committee. Under action items, the Citizens Advisory Committee approved and has forwarded to this board a couple of items. The environmentally sensitive noise walls white paper, which is on your agenda today, was reviewed and discussed at some length. The CAC recommended and forwarded this to you with the following amendments. First, that they've asked that you consider the mitigation of noise and speed at their origins. That is the noise created by motorcycles, truck braking, and other factors. We believe that these are a public health issue as well as a noise issue, and so we added that to our consideration. We also added the benefit and the cost analysis of solar panels, which could be attached to the noise walls. We think they could help offset the cost of constructing and maintaining the noise walls and their overall cost effectiveness in the environment. And finally, the CAC asked that you consider the impacts to the natural environment as well as the human environment as part of the construction of these noise walls. The Citizens Advisory also heard a status report on the fiscal year 21-22 Unified Planning Work Program and the call for projects. We're going to revisit this topic at our next meeting coming up in another week. On your agenda today, there is an opportunity for you to expand our board. There are 2 reappointments and I think 1 or 2 new appointments on your consent agenda, and we encourage you to help us fill out our board. That would leave probably only 1 temporary vacancy in the board. Our members expressed some interest also in a couple of items. One, there was a request by one of our members to get some further data on the use of roundabouts in the traffic patterns in and throughout Hillsborough County. And then Mr. Fernandez also asked for an update on the status of the Boulevard study, which I know has come before you previously. And finally, Rick Richmond is our CAC representative to TBARTA. Rick gave a brief report on the status of TBARTA's ongoing project for the RRT. That Citizens Advisory Committee is also meeting this afternoon. Rick Richmond advised us that the plans for the rapid transit program have now scaled down to 12 or 13 stations along that proposed route, information that you probably are aware of. That was well received by the CAC. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Any questions, Mr. Roberts?
Thank
You, sir. Ms. Gina Torres. Pardon?
Hi, good morning, board members. My name is Wanda West, MPO staff. Last month, your committees held their annual elections of officers and reviewed member attendance. The Technical Advisory Committee reelected Jeff Sims as chair and Mike Williams as vice chair. Tony Garcia was elected as the officer at large. The Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee reelected Jonathan Forbes as chair and Jim Shirk as vice chair. The Livable Roadways Committee reelected David Hay as vice chair and Kathy Coyle as the officer at large. The Intelligent Transportation System Committee elected Brandon Campbell as chair, Brian Gentry as vice chair, and Jeff Sims as the officer at large. HART is seeking a replacement for Shannon Haney, who previously served as the primary appointee to the ITS committee. Until a replacement is found, Chris Cochran will serve as primary and Justin Willits will serve as the alternate. Committees reviewed and recommended approval of the 2020 Safety Performance Targets and the Environmentally Sensitive Noise Walls White Paper, which are action items on your agenda today. The LRC approved the white paper, supported transmittal to potential implementing agency, and strongly encouraged forming the Noise Wall Working Group. The LRC volunteered to participate with the working group and received a refresher on Robert's Rules of Order and Parliamentary Procedures. Committees received the status report on the fiscal year 21 and 22 Unified Planning Work Program call for projects. The LRC will also revisit this item at their next meeting. The ITS committee dedicated its meeting to host a workshop discussing the recently launched ClearGuide data and analytics platform. This group also discussed data governance principles, identified additional data sets to add, analytical capabilities, and next steps. Staff did not receive any emails or Facebook comments. This concludes my report.
Thank you. Let me ask you a question. Did you get promoted?
Yes.
What do you do now?
Community Relations Coordinator.
Okay, I have about 15 questions I need to ask you. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll talk to you later.
Any questions, Ms. West? Congratulations. Okay. Now move to consent agenda, committee reports. Then have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Motion by Commissioner Overman, second by Commissioner Kemp to approve the consent agenda. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor let them know by saying aye. Aye. Opposed likewise, motion is adopted. Now moving to action items, environmentally friendly noise walls white paper. Ms. Ogilvy.
Good morning, Michelle Ogilvy, Planning Commission. Wrong thing. Now, if I could just find it. I'm MPO staff today. So you heard a lot already about the environmentally sensitive walls, and I'd like to say that this is a research paper and has been provided for you from the perspective of a global experience. And let's get going on it. It was MPO request. It does provide you with potential practices and was closely coordinated with the FDOT staff involved in the interstate widening and study. And it is an opportunity for further action or future action. We know that noise does affect public health, and that because traffic does make noise and provide some other impacts, that we do need to address this because of the Noise Control Act of 1972, which does acknowledge that Americans need to be free from noise. The noise walls are used to buffer homes and other sensitive land uses. They do reduce traffic noise by as much as half. They are most effective within 200 feet of a highway, and they do reduce noise levels for people living next to the highway. Environmentally sensitive land uses include homes, schools, parks, and churches. And noise does affect human health with things like sleep disorders, heart disease, hypertension, cognitive impairment, and hearing loss. The health in all policies that this MPO has adopted asks us to consider air quality. And this white paper has a great deal of discussion on air quality. We do know that traffic emissions impact air quality by producing carbon monoxide, particulate matter, which you just heard some discussion on, ultrafine carbons and hydrocarbons, to name a few of the toxins that we do have in our air. Health risks include and are provided, and the white paper does report on this, from the American Lung Association and many of the others who have studied air quality in our nation, and the world actually. Childhood asthma, chronic obstruction pulmonary disease, which is called COPD. It's like, oh my gosh. And impaired lung function. These are just a few of the risks that we do face because of our poor air quality. Walls can do more than just noise. They do provide some health benefits. They do and can reduce pollution concentrations from about 20 to 70%, and that's discussed in the white paper. There is a prevalence of asthma along the I-4 and I-275 corridors, as is reflected in this map that we have from our health atlas, which was also produced as part of our health program for the Healthier Cities and Counties Challenge. There are other technologies that the white paper does provide and suggest. One of them is a smog stop barriers, which are used in Canada as well as the United Kingdom. They provide many health goals in terms of aesthetics as well as air quality and noise. And here is a picture of one, this one on the right, or it should be on your right, is in the United Kingdom. Another was provided by the FDOT staff to us, is down in South Florida in Miami-Dade. Some of the mitigation conditions that are discussed in the white paper include trees. We do recall, some of us, that for a while, I-275 had a great many trees along it, especially through West Tampa. It's part of the discussion that went on. They are no longer there. But they do provide a barrier that does help to improve our air quality and reduce air pollutants. And we have a picture from the report on the top, and the bottom one is from South Florida, again, in Boca Raton, along the, I always forget the name of that highway, but anyway. There are some other opportunities that walls can provide that the white paper does provide. One of them is the idea of solar panels. This picture comes out of Holland, in which it is providing some improvements to the quality of the air, quality of the noise, but also providing a placemaking opportunity and also providing electricity for use. The living barrier is also a picture that we provided in the white paper. So there are opportunities beyond just noise, allowing for some beautification and aesthetics. As you have heard, from the committee reports, the Citizens Advisory Committee asked for three things as they forwarded a recommendation of approval to the MPO board: to consider mitigation at its source. Mr. Roberts already did this, but let me just say it again. Looking for the benefits and cost analysis of solar panels as a way of paying for these, offsetting the cost of these walls, and considering impacts to the natural as well as the human element. So we also had a great deal of discussion at the Livable Roadways Committee, and in which you heard that they asked for the formation of a noise wall working group. And so our recommendation to you this morning is to accept the report and transmit it to the implementing agencies for consideration in future projects, and particularly in our high-density populated areas and communities of concern. We also wish to ask that you establish an MPO noise wall working group that could become the subcommittee of the Livable Roadways Committee to address the concerns that have been forwarded to you. This concludes my presentation, Mr.
Thank you, Ms.
Chairman.
Ogilvy. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Commissioner Overman, you recognize.
So I'm always quite frustrated by how our funding mechanisms work. So to the comments that were made by our citizen earlier today, while noise walls have aesthetic and important environmental concerns, they are not paid for by FDOT. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
They are.
According to the
can be.
report, it says another gap FDOT is attending to bridge is between the funding sources. Noise walls are typically funded by state and federal funds. In Florida, specifically, these funds are not applicable to barriers not deemed reasonably or feasibly priced. In your opinion, the examples of noise walls that you showed us, have they been deemed reasonably priced?
We had a conversation about that at the CAC, and that was why they forwarded the idea that perhaps you could offset cost. One of the standards, my understanding of how noise walls are built, is that it has the feasibility is one of the tests, but there are other public interests that need to also be addressed. So I think that the literature says, how should I put this nicely? That yes, cost is always going to be an issue. But if it is the will of the community, then I do believe that you can have the costs addressed by the funding mechanisms in place.
Thank you very much for your comments. As part of the SEIS, it would probably be a recommendation that these be implemented in order to protect our citizens from a highway running through the middle of our town. And your maps indicated that our most vulnerable communities are those that are most impacted. To have their resources removed from things like affordable housing in dense areas where jobs are, to pay for a highway impact at the local level, I find challenging. Let's just put it that way. So I would encourage in the process of a planning of this that we require that the state make this a priority if this is something that is necessary according to the environmental impact report. Thank you.
Commissioner Kemp, you recognize.
Thank you. As has been stated and discussed many times, for noise purposes, but also for the impacts of pollution on neighborhoods, these walls are important. And, I appreciate the research from Canada and Europe in terms of absorption of pollution. It seems as though we have a tried and true absorption mechanism, which are trees and greens. And so I also would like to, look at more emphasis or thoughts about how that can go. I appreciate seeing some new information about how these walls could be, particularly the clear glass, but I don't understand how maintenance would work on something like that. I wouldn't want solar, I'm a big promoter of solar, but if solar is just kind of like lipstick on a pig in this case.
Excuse me. We're about to lose our quorum. Go ahead. Go ahead.
If this is just lipstick on a pig in this case, and it would be not a cost affordable or doesn't make sense to put panels there that they're just to appease people and not really the best place for them, then I wouldn't be supporting that. But I'm interested in moving forward on these walls. I just wanted to express that, and I'd also be adamantly opposed to neighborhoods having to fund walls. I just think that would be a double insult to neighborhoods. At first, you put the road and all the impacts of pollution through them, and then you ask the neighborhood to pay for it.
Okay, what's your pleasure?
Accept the report?
Motion, the recommendation is set the report and
Second.
transmit it to, there's a motion by Commissioner Kemp,
Or
I'm sorry, Commissioner Smith, second by Commissioner Kemp to accept the report and transmit it to a potential implementing agency for consideration of future projects, particularly in high-density population areas and community of concern, and additionally establish a MPO noise wall working group as a subcommittee of the Livable Roadways Committee and address the other MPO committee requests with the LRC subcommittee. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, let them know by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise, motion is adopted.
Thank you very much, Board.
Also, there was a recommendation, if I'm recognized,
What was the recommendation?
a second recommendation to start a livable, part of the livable
That's what I
roadways.
said.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that second part. Sorry, excuse me.
Okay.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. 2020 safety performance targets, Mr. Wong?
Good morning, board members.
Morning.
Johnny Wong, MPO staff. Here to recap our 2019 crash performance and present to you our 2020 safety performance targets. So this is, the target setting process is an activity that we're required to do every year. This is the third year that we're doing it, and I hope that this year will be the easiest of the three. Since the last time I stood before you and helped guide your decision-making process about how to set the targets, a lot has happened in the county, some good, some neutral. But I want to call attention to 4 things that have kind of changed the safety landscape over the past year. Number one, we embarked on a comprehensive Vision Zero speed management study, and you're going to receive an update on that study a little bit later in the agenda. There have been some high-impact, highly effective safety improvements put on some of our high crash corridors, namely Busch Boulevard and Hillsborough Avenue, which have had a significant impact. The sales surtax project plans were certified as compliant by the IOC. That money is being withheld at the moment, but within those plans, there are a number of general safety improvements laid out by each of the governments, as well as some specific bike ped safety projects. And lastly, the MPO adopted its 2045 long-range transportation plan update. So before we get into the targets that we're proposing for calendar year 2020, I just want to provide a little bit of context. This target setting process originates from MAP 21 legislation requiring DOTs and MPOs to track performance on the 5 performance measures shown on this screen. The methodologies prescribed by the feds, we have to calculate the future year's crash performance based on 5 years of historical data. So for 2020, we're looking at 2015 through 2019 data. This is a coordinated process that the MPO works with DOT on. DOT, over the past 3 years, has set its statewide safety target at 0, and for calendar year 2020, they did the same. After DOT sets its statewide target, the MPO has to establish its target, which needs to be reported to the feds by February 27th of this year. And then toward the end of the year, FHWA will review the state's crash performance and make a determination as to whether or not they're progressing toward achieving that target. And District 7 will also review our targets. There is no penalty for MPOs if we fail to meet our targets. There are penalties for DOTs, but they're kind of inconsequential. The penalty for a DOT not making progress toward the target would be that a greater proportion of its safety funds have to go towards safety projects, but in the state of Florida, we're maxed out. I want to share a little note about our target setting methodology, and then I'll explain what that methodology is. Toward the end of 2019, we hosted a workshop in our office, and there were a number of Florida MPOs in attendance. We had some FHWA staff, we had some DOT staff, as well as a nationally recognized Vision Zero advocate. And we shared what our target setting methodology has been over the past 3 years. And following that workshop, FHWA informed us that they're going to nominate us, our target setting methodology, to be a best practice. So we're very proud of the work we've done in this area. To come up with the expected performance for 2020, we look at 10 years of historical crash data. We compose a linear projection to forecast what our performance will be in future years. Once we have that number, we apply a crash reduction factor that we generated from our needs assessment work, and that gives us what the expected performance will be at the end of the year based on a certain level of safety funding. We calculated that if a certain level of safety funding holds through the year 2045, the impact that we can expect to have will be to reduce crashes by 35%, as well as, that 35% will be accomplished by putting down a number of safety treatments on our high crash corridors. Those treatments include putting 1,400 sidewalk miles on MPO's major roads so that we have continuous coverage on at least one side of every road. That'll include 500 miles of new standard street lights, including operational costs, and we can also do 370 miles of complete streets treatments on our high crash corridors. If we're able to accomplish all of that, then we expect that we'll be able to reduce our crashes by 35%. So that 35% reduction is what will happen over the next 20 years. If you take that crash reduction figure and work it backwards, that works out to an annual reduction of 2.1%. Before we get into the actual targets that we're proposing for you, I want to note that because the sales tax safety funds have not yet been released, we decided not to assume a crash reduction of 2.1% for this coming year. It's a reduction of 0.93% instead. And this year, like last year, I want to call attention to some highly effective projects that we think could really make a difference in the way of our crash performance. Fletcher Avenue is a great example of a project that bundled a number of treatments in which outperformed the expectation for the crash reduction. FHWA in Hillsborough County did a before and after study on Fletcher Avenue this past year, and I believe that the results will be presented to you pretty soon. What they found is that since those complete streets improvements were laid down, auto traffic is up, average speed is down, bike ped volumes are up, and yet serious injuries and fatal crashes have gone down significantly. If that sales tax money were released, we would have enough funds to do about 7 of these kind of projects each year through the year 2045. And also in 2019, there was another very impactful project on a smaller scale, but 50th Street. That corridor has a history of a lot of pedestrian crashes. That segment now includes raised crosswalks, flashing beacons, sidewalks, and reduced speed limits, and we would expect that in future years, those investments will pay off significantly. All right, no further delay. So this first target that we're proposing is something that you all requested that we provide last year. This is not a federally required target, but it's something that you all wanted to see. So rather than this being a 5-year average, this is the calendar year 2020 number that we expect to have. So our 2020 fatality target is to be less than 209, is to have less than 209 fatalities. This map shows the location of fatalities in 2019, and I'm going to play this clip to show you what the impact could be on fatalities if the sales tax funding plus existing funding holds through the year 2045. So that's the impact that some of these Vision Zero treatments could have. This is the first required target that we're proposing to you all. This is fatalities on a 5-year rolling average. And for calendar year 2020, the target that we're proposing to you is to have fewer than 204 fatalities. This is another optional, not required target that we're presenting to you for the first time. We recently had a workshop with DOT and we were discussing why 2019 was such a bad year countywide for fatalities. And we learned that DOT and some staff at Qatar are looking into the details of why 2019 was so bad. But one of the initial conclusions that they can draw from the data is that motorcycle fatalities are way up. It's too early to generalize, or it's too early to draw significantly precise conclusions. That was a little bit of word jumble. But some of the things that we have theorized as to why the fatality rate went up is that Hillsborough County had a dramatic increase in the number of sport bike registrations. It also had a dramatic increase in the number of new motorcycle licenses issued. This could mean that people who were previously walkers, bikers, and transit users can now purchase a motorcycle and maybe they don't have the experience to operate it safely. Or it could be a symptom of a growing economy and people are perhaps purchasing sport bikes as a weekend toy, and that could also contribute to the dangerous effect of motorcycles on the network. This target is federally required. This is our serious injuries over a 5-year rolling average. You can see that over the past decade, we've been trending downward at a fairly good rate. And so if this rate continues to hold through the following year, we're expecting 1,255. And so our target would be to have fewer than 1,255 serious injuries. I produced this map to show you the location of serious injury crashes in 2019. This is another required target. This is our non-motorized, i.e. bike-impaired fatalities and serious injuries combined. This is also trending downward slightly, and we're expecting that in calendar year 2020, we will have 222 fatalities, and our target would be to have fewer than 222. And this map shows the location of those crashes. Another required measure is fatality rate per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. You can see that it's increasing slightly over the past decade, and so our 2020 target would be to have fewer than, or to have a rate slightly less than 1.41. This graphic shows that as VMT has increased, our fatalities have increased in the county. This is the last required target. Our serious injury rate per 100 million vehicle miles traveled has trended downward again, and our 2020 target is to have a rate less than 8.70 injuries per 100 million VMT. Contrasting this graph to what we saw for fatalities, our serious injuries have gone down despite a VMT increase in the county. What that means is, if you look at all bad crashes, a higher proportion of them are now resulting in fatalities. That, of course, raises a lot more questions as to why, but we suspect that it could have, or it could be attributed to a large part by speed. Another thing that could influence this is incident clearance times. So response times, if a crash occurs, those people need to get to the hospital very quickly. Another thing that is somewhat out of our control, but the quality of emergency care. So there are two of the three contributing factors we have a role in controlling. This is the last slide before we get to the approval. This is a report card for how we did in 2019. The column labeled 2019 target are the targets that we adopted last year. The column to the right of that is the actuals. So for our 2019 single year fatality target, we did not meet it. We set it at 163. We had a much worse year than what we were anticipating. We ended with 211. Our fatality 5-year rolling average target we set at 188, and we ended up with 200. We didn't meet that. We met and exceeded our serious injuries over a 5-year average. We set the target at 1354, and we ended up with 1304. We exceeded our bike ped fatalities and injuries combined. We did not meet our fatality rate per VMT. We met and exceeded by a lot our serious injury rate per VMT. The targets that we're proposing are on the write-up in your board packet. The action that we're proposing is for you to adopt the calendar year 2020 targets based on the methodology that we approved for the 2045 long-range transportation plan. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Wong? Commissioner Smith, you recognize.
Thank you. This is all very macabre and sad, tragic, really. Last year, I was asking if we couldn't do better, and it turns out we've done worse in actual fact. But I don't think we should just accept that moving forward and say, well, our target is going to be what we've been doing. Because, I mean, what we've been doing is abysmal. And it's also very eye-opening that we're only recommended to accept less than 1% reduction in the deaths and injuries if we, not considering the tax money. And only if we get the tax money could we project that we would be able to lower the deaths 35% over the next 25 years. So that's, instead of 200 and something deaths per year, 25 years from now, if we got that tax, the best case scenario is 130 something deaths per year. And that tax is on life support right now. So it seems to me, and I was asking last year if we couldn't, what we could do to make these targets more ambitious and help us get out of the bottom of the most dangerous places in America for bicycles and pedestrians. I remember saying I want Vision 0 to mean something better than Vision 200. And so it seems to me that these targets are that we have recommended here are based on capital expenses for actual bicycle pedestrian infrastructure, safe infrastructure on the roads. But I think if we worked with other processes in our county, we could hope to shoot a little better. We could set our target better by saying we're going to incorporate other free things that we could do. For example, in our county, we're working with the Development Services and Planning Commission. Our county commission has been having land use workshops to say we are going, in the next 12 months, our Development Services work plan includes painting all the bike lanes green. That's got to count for a point-something% somewhere. And we are also going to look very hard at the design exceptions to our road standards that we have been allowing as we rezone things that would that have been kind of allowing narrower lanes with no bike lanes and maybe less than one to both sidewalks. So we've been allowing exceptions pretty routinely to designs of roads as we do zonings, which has eliminated the possibility of even the legal 3-foot passing area for cars to pass bicycles. So if we were, we have put that in our 12-month work plan, measures like that at the county side. So I'm asking if the MPO could, kind of think outside its box and silo and work with the county Planning Commission and Development Services and County Commission to try to set our target a little bit less deaths by figuring out what some of these other measures might do to help. Lowering the speed management in the high crash corridors, signal timing. Can't some of that possibly increase penalties for speed control? Can't some of that help us to set a better target for this year than 0.93% reduction in deaths, which is instead of 209, 206? Can't we set our sights I would like us to set a more ambitious goal. And I see that you have the deadline is February 27. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to talk about this earlier. Is it possible to bring this back next month with maybe some consideration of the kinds of things I've talked about besides just capital expenses to consider a more ambitious target?
Who's going to answer that? Which one of you? You going to answer it, Mr. Torres? Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Johnny, I know you have, as your Vision Zero project manager, that's a human being with a loved one. That's 200 faces and names. So it's heartbreaking. Actually, today, we have some good news to share during the status reports about some really effective projects that have been done or are underway that we can start moving and seeing that those have effectively been able to reduce these serious crashes and fatalities. There's other low-hanging fruit that we can do, like what you've just mentioned, and pedestrian countdown signals and marked crosswalks on side streets that are high visibility. Law enforcement, our entire action plan for Vision Zero has not just engineering suggestions. It's a lot of low-cost other things we can do with just groundswell of community support for these things, getting people to slow down. And we'll be hearing about that, the speed management action plan. I think that's something that you might enjoy hearing, as well as Fletcher and the Busch Boulevard presentations. So I'm not suggesting that you delay this recommendation, but if you would want to, we have some great things to share, and I'm definitely feel your pain with that.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Kemp, Commissioner Kemp, be recognized.
Well, I guess I would just also first want to start by asking what Commissioner Smith asked. Is it possible to continue this, to try to work on it some more?
We do have a deadline to set these targets within this time frame, and the way that the analysis is done is fairly prescribed. That being said, I think that you've brought up some really important points about other things that can be done that don't necessarily require a lot of capital investment. A number of those decisions are outside the purview of this board. And so I think if we are going to make a difference with some of those, low cost and no cost strategies, that we are going to need the cooperation and coordination of other groups, including the sheriff's office, for example, including land development from all four of our jurisdictions. And so I guess I would suggest to you that if you would like to advance some of those policies, maybe we should convene a summit of some kind to talk with leadership of all of the folks who could make a difference with these kinds of policies on our crash rates.
I guess I think we should be doing more. It sounds like we're operating a lot in silos. By the way, I was very impressed by Fletcher Avenue. I just wonder about, if we can start to do things faster and somehow at lower costs. Some of these things, just to implement them sooner rather than later. We are talking about lives here, saving lives. Also, in terms of the land use, I'm just wondering too about one of the biggest indicators are reducing vehicle miles traveled, and how we can make our land use policies conform. And we need to have that as a policy in terms of land use, is that we are looking to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Also, one of the biggest indicators of bringing down deaths and serious injury is more transit. As I've read online from studies that show the best closest to Vision Zero rates are totally tied to increased transit. So I'm just wondering about those metrics, and I appreciate that you received a best practices recognition. I'd like to see if we could even, I don't know how it works and how we can put in these metrics and how we can communicate that to both the city, county, FDOT in terms of making this happen in a coherent way. And maybe your summit idea is a way to go forward with that. I think it's extremely important. And I just read on Streets blog, which I'm sure for those of you who read that, that at least a couple of European cities, of course, are far ahead of us in all of this, just reduced their number for the year to 0. They actually, in cities in Europe, had 0. Now, I know they're not the county and they're not the American way of vehicle miles traveled and lifestyle, but they went to 0, and they have a true Vision Zero. And so I would like us to see CSB a little more ambitious and coordinated, and see how we can move forward on this. I guess we could pass this today, but I think I want to see us get really, really far more serious about what we can do at lower cost and how we can move forward on reducing deaths.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback, commissioners. The way that we've treated the relationship between the Vision Zero document and the annual safety targets is that the effect of the ambitious strategies is more reflected in the Vision Zero document. The way that we've kind of considered the annual safety targets is that this is a reflection of conditions as they currently exist. And so I think we all know that this community needs structural, operational, and really cultural changes. But until those things happen, we have no way of predicting what is going to happen next year. So we use the data for the annual target setting process, and we want it to be really realistic. If those more grand scale changes are on the horizon, I think that the perfect place to reflect those would be in the Vision Zero program.
Mayor Lott, do you recognize?
I appreciate all the comments, and I think they're all great comments and so forth. But I'll tell you, when it takes you 90 minutes to travel 24 miles, okay, everyone is changing lanes, running red light, doing everything in the world just to get to work on time, and they're rushing into a garage, okay? At the end of the day, I didn't see one bicyclist or one motorcycle, and on my way in, okay? I know they're there. I know they're out throughout the day and so forth, and obviously we want safety for everybody. I said, but in rush hour traffic, this entire county, it's not just one section. It's not just downtown or West Shore. It's Big Bend, it's Plant City, it's the entire county. We're at a standstill twice a day. And, that rush hour used to be from 3:30 to 6:30, and now if you don't get out of Tampa by 2:30, you can't get out into the suburbs and so forth. So the bottom line is that I think we got to do everything we can, and every striping, everything we can. But until we start, adding in all categories, I don't see how you get to 0. I think you got to have more busing, you have more lanes, more wider lanes. You have, our interstate system. We've got to look at it from a complete strategy. And sometimes I feel like, we slow down progress versus speed up progress. Okay, and so I hope this board going forward, we look towards how we can speed process it versus slowing the process down. I'll tell you, if I travel the entire state all the time, and I hate saying this, but I see improvements being made in Jacksonville, in Orlando, in South Florida, in every major city in the Florida except for Tampa Bay, okay? I see small changes, but I don't see massive changes, okay? So there's got to be some common element of why FDOT is able to make such great improvements throughout the rest of the state, but it doesn't occur here in as much as I see in the other areas of the state here in Tampa Bay, And I don't think it's a lack of desire from FDOT. So, somewhere we have to take responsibility of seeing how we can help out FDOT do more versus FDOT do less. So, I have a goal, just like all of us, to have Vision Zero, But as long as it takes you 90 minutes to travel 24 miles to get into downtown, you'll never see zero, you know. Thank you, sir.
Let me comment on what you just said, Mayor Lott, and I'm gonna go back to my legislative days. The reason you see improvements in Duval, Orange, and Miami-Dade, and not much in Hillsborough County, is political leadership in Tallahassee. They know that. When you have speakers of the House and president of the Senate from those areas, they funnel more money through their DOT secretary than we get here. Until we start having and we start working and getting better leadership for our legislative bodies up there, until we start having more committee chairs that do allot the money and speakers of the House and president of the Senate, it won't happen. Won't happen. So I just wanted to put that out there because I drove to Plant City the other night to make a speech, and I left home at 4:45, and I got there just in time enough for the meeting to start. So I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. Let me ask another question here. Your motorcycle fatalities, let me back up. Your fatalities targeted 5-year rollover average, does that include your motorcycle fatalities or is motorcycle fatalities separate?
The annual fatality target includes all modes.
Okay.
This is only crashes that result in a death to a motorcyclist.
And let me say something that it would take forever to properly get done. In the state of Florida, you do not have to go through a training to buy a motorcycle. After you buy it, you're on your own. You can drive it however you want to drive it. And that's a major problem because the mere fact is that I can go out to Harley-Davidson right now and buy a motorcycle and jump on it, and I have no idea how to drive that doggone thing. And I'm opening up myself for death. The second thing that happened is a dumb legislature passed no helmet law. And the day the governor signed it, a motorcycle was killed on I-4 and I-275 with his head hit the wall. So one of the things that we may try to do, and it will take probably 5 years to get it done, and it will be a war, is to make sure that we can get legislation passed in the state of Florida that if you buy a motorcycle and they're buying them more and more every day, they have to take training before they buy it. You have to do it before you drive a car, but you don't have to do it before you drive a motorcycle. And that's a major factor. And we see more and more motorcycle deaths in Hillsborough County and across the state because of the mere fact that they don't have to have training to drive a motorcycle. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to add, I have joined recently the state's Motorcycle Safety Coalition. And it's an eye-opener because it's not a mode I've ever used myself, and I'm learning so much. There were classes in schools. They were even providing free grants so that people don't have to pay, but they're not required to do it.
Right.
And the helmet law, every head in that room turned and thought I said something. It was just going to be something I'm not going to give up on, but it doesn't seem to have a ton of support. But there's the speed management to me, automated enforcement. Start ticketing people who are speeding. This is, something in the future we need to look at because motorcyclists tend to also drive a little faster than, some of the other modes. By the way, Vision Zero covers all modes. We have more auto fatalities than we have bike and ped. So we do consider all the modes.
Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Smith, to recognize very shortly.
Very short. If we were just being asked to accept a report of the 5-year rolling average of what we've been doing, and that's 0.93% reduction a year, I would be fine with that. But if what we're being asked to do is accept a target of doing the same thing and expecting the same results, I can't support it, and that's why.
Thank you. I want to go back and thank Mayor Lott for the comments. I want to say that we have goals to increase travel time reliability as well and reduce congestion. And we don't necessarily view the goals of reducing crashes as exclusive to the goal of improving travel time reliability. In fact, we're engaging in discussions about technologies and operational treatments that can do both. FDOT has commissioned a consultant to work on a ramp metering feasibility assessment. That technology would reduce crashes on limited access facilities and as a result, improve congestion because you don't get the backups from having fender benders pulled off to the side. Another thing that we're talking about is an operational policy to stage first responders in locations where we know we're gonna have crashes every day. So rather than deploying fire trucks and ambulance from their station where they're currently, to have those responders be posted somewhere closer where the crash is. So those incident response times could come way down.
Okay, what's your pleasure? There's a motion by Mayor Lott. Is there a second? Second by someone. Oh, Mr. Wagner. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Opposed likewise.
Nay.
Motion is adopted. Okay, new legislative propositions. Ms. Alden, you recognize.
Thank you, sir. There is in your packet a copy of the letter that we transmitted last year with 4 positions to our legislative delegation. Since that time, 2 potential positions for your consideration have come forward. And so they are in the form of letters from 2 other MPOs. One is from Forward Pinellas, and it is about Senate Bill 1000 and House Bill 1371, which would basically tie the hands of our traffic safety engineers in being able to use rapid flashing beacons as a safety treatment to improve the safety of pedestrian crosswalks. So you're going to see in a few minutes a very detailed before and after study on the Fletcher Avenue corridor, which had 5 of these rapid flashing beacons. On Fletcher, that improved driver yielding behavior by more than 90%. And you saw Johnny's summary that deaths were down 60%, serious injuries down 46%. That is just one example of the effectiveness of rapid flashing beacons in improving safety. This is a proven safety countermeasure that Federal Highway has brought out as one of its best practices for pedestrian safety. So I would bring to you for consideration that we might take a position similar to Forward Pinellas in asking the legislature not to tie the hands of our safety engineers and to continue to allow us to use rapid flashing beacons where they are deemed appropriate by our engineers. The second position that I would bring to you is from the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization. And so they are proposing that there be a change to the statute about the use of toll revenue. So right now, Florida statute allows that toll revenues can be used for express bus service on the facility where the toll revenues have been collected after other things are paid off, like bond payments for creating those toll roads and operation and maintenance expenses for those toll roads. So if there are additional revenues available after those expenses are paid off, they can be used for express bus service. What Miami-Dade TPO is proposing is that that language be broadened a little bit to transit in general, not just limited to express bus service operating on that highway. So, for example, the express bus service could run on a parallel highway, or the revenue could be used for rail on a parallel facility. So they have brought that forward to several of the MPOs that have transit systems and investments. Forward Pinellas and Sarasota Manatee have signed on to the letter. North Florida TPO in Jacksonville and Metropolitan Orlando are considering it later this month. So I seek your pleasure and direction on whether we should take either or both of these positions.
Do you need separate motions?
No, I don't think so.
I'll move both of
I
them.
have a motion by Commissioner Smith. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Hagan. Any discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Kemp, you recognize.
Yes, I just want to say that I am not necessarily in favor of moving the toll revenue or broadening it. I think there's not enough for express buses now, and at all, and I think it should be limited to express buses on the and I have questions about broadening it for other reasons.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Smith, second by Commissioner Hagan. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, let it be known saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Motion is adopted. Motion is adopted. Okay, move to status reports. Ms. Torres,
Yes,
making progress on safety.
I'm just going to introduce this series of presentations. This is the good news after Johnny's not so happy news, but the reality of our crash problems. But anyway, we'd like to have the county come up and Wade, who will give you some good news about the Fletcher Avenue Complete Streets project. This was, Fletcher was #1 in 2013, and probably every year before that is killing people on that corridor. And the county took a serious approach to redesigning that roadway with the help of state dollars. So I think you'll be impressed with what you hear about that, and there follow with a couple other presentations that are also very impactful. So Bob, did you want to just introduce the topic, and then Wade will come in behind you? Which one first? Behavioral.
I'm Bob Campbell. I'm the transportation engineer for Hillsborough County. What I want to tell here is not the good news. I'll leave it to Wade. Okay, I just want to briefly state the history of this road and why we undertook this project. The MPO here in 2010 recognized this particular corridor as the highest crash corridor in Hillsborough County. Based upon that study, Hillsborough County decided to do a study and see what could be done from Nebraska Avenue over to Bruce B. Downs. As a result of that, we also developed a project in concert with a number of agencies. And this particular project encases the three critical components of roadway safety. That is engineering, enforcement, and education. Those are all embodied in what you'll hear today on this particular project. As a part of that, one of the drivers for this project to get something solved up here was the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. They wanted to solve the safety problem on one of their roads, and so they were actively involved in the inception of this and through the implementation after the project, including the education and enforcement component. The day we opened the road, they staffed the whole corridor with patrol cars, and they stopped. A number of drivers violating the traffic control devices, and after a week or so, people became used to following the devices. Concurrent with that, the University of South Florida, through their cutter, also helped us with education. They provided various cards and bilingual to different groups in that particular community, and helped paid for by the MPO to do that. Also, I want to acknowledge that District 7 particularly were involved in inception of this project and helped us get funding for it. And also, at their request, this particular project incorporated a number of innovative and creative ideas on how to do safety. These ideas now are been incorporated in various technical manuals issued statewide, as well as been incorporated in Federal Highway Administration publications to do that. What you're here today is a result of a requirement of the federal government. We do a before and after study, and what Wade's going to present now is the result of the after, which has now been presented from the state of Florida to the federal government on the result of this particular project. With that, I'll turn over to Wade to tell the good news. Okay.
Good morning, board members. Wade Reynolds, MPO staff. I'll just be going through first the behavioral research of users of Fletcher Avenue by Cutter, and then we'll go through the engineering treatments and their analysis of the effectiveness of those. So just to start with, the research objectives in this Cutter study were to learn how individuals use the crosswalks, the willingness of individuals to properly use those, and the opinions about the crosswalks, and the barriers people experience related to not properly using crosswalks. So this was done in November and December 2018, and a number of observations came out of that. The December 2018 observations, when people when we were looking at people, they were looking at people to see, do people use the crosswalk to cross the street? That is at an 83.5% rate. That is up from the previous looks in 2014 and 2015. 16% still do not use the crosswalks. Almost 90% are pushing the crosswalk signal button, but 12% still are not. So that's the bicyclists and pedestrians. For bicyclists, very few are wearing helmets, so that's still an issue, and the majority are still biking on the sidewalk, almost 84% biking on the sidewalk instead of using the bike lanes, which is about 16%. So when we look at the mode of transportation surveyed in this analysis, almost 78% were pedestrians, 21% cyclists, and 1.3% using a wheelchair. So looking at distraction, 91% were not distracted as they were using those crosswalks. They define that as looking somewhere else other than the road. Another 9% still are distracted, so when using the mid-block crossings, it's important to not be distracted, obviously, because you are hoping that people will stop at those locations for you. Looking at motorist yielding behavior, 97.2% did yield at those mid-block crossings. 2.8% still are not yielding to pedestrians and cyclists crossing there, which is very dangerous, but the vast majority are, which shows a pretty good success rate of those technologies. So in the intercept surveys, when the researchers talked to people out on the street, walking and biking, the top reasons for traveling along Fletcher Avenue were largely retail and to and from work. Retail was 45%, going to and from work was about 12%. Other reasons were errands, going to healthcare, going to a bus stop, or getting exercise. Proximity of home to Fletcher Avenue, 66% of the people walking there are within 1 mile of the location they were walking or biking. The other 32% were over that 1 mile rate. So when people were asked what are the barriers to using crosswalks, the number that keeps going up is I always use the crosswalk on Fletcher Avenue, which is great. From 2014, that went from 81 respondents to 112. Just as you're looking at that rises over time, which is a great number. Looking at the perceptions of crossing Fletcher Avenue, 56% feel that it's either safe or very safe, but 44% still feel that it's an unsafe facility. So those numbers are pretty consistent going back, and there's still a perception of about 50-50 safe versus unsafe. Just skipping ahead a little bit, dealing with whether people, this, for example, deals with who do people think are trustworthy. Police officers were the highest rated, followed by public officials. Knowledge of traffic laws. Some people don't know any laws, and jaywalking, which is not really a traffic law as defined here, was the second highest. But reasons for not using crosswalks. The two highest reasons were people being impatient or in a hurry, or the ease and convenience of not using it, or feeling crosswalks were unsafe. The next one is that no cars were coming, so people just ran across, which is pretty common behavior, and I think we've all seen or experienced that. So in terms of the reasons people feel safe, one was just a general feeling of safety. The second was lighting, followed by drivers yielding, and then staying alert. Those are all reasons that people suggested that they feel safe here. Unsafe feelings, again, just a general feeling of unsafety or non-safety. And cars not yielding, which I think is the big standout here. So the conclusions of this behavioral study, more pedestrians and bicyclists were observed using the crosswalks and pushing the crosswalk button compared to previous years. The observed incidence of pedestrian and bicyclist distraction continues to be low, showing a decline from 2014. 77 of those interviewed said they felt safe crossing Fletcher Avenue in a crosswalk, an increase of 16% from 2015. And although the crosswalk use is high, observations indicated there are still people who will cross outside of those crosswalks on Fletcher. People indicated that more crosswalks, police intervention, and education would make themselves and others more likely to use the crosswalks. So those are the results of the behavioral study. I will switch over to the engineering analysis, which has some interesting conclusions as well. So Just to skip over the agenda for this, the improvements consisted of 5 mid-block pedestrian crossings with overhead and ground-mounted rapid flashing beacons, 1 mid-block pedestrian crossing with a traffic control signal, which is in front of the Walmart there, I believe. The LED lighting added at pedestrian crossings, that would be LED overhead lighting to illuminate those crossing areas. Raised pedestrian refuge islands and raised traffic separators installed. Landscaping features incorporated into the median. Bicycle lanes added to both sides of the road. The speed limit reduced from 45 to 35 miles an hour. And media outreach and education of the public and high visibility enforcement efforts. So those improvements, adding bicycle lanes, traffic separators, et cetera. Excuse me. Yes. So starting with just the traffic volume on Fletcher Avenue. It has increased by 2% on Fletcher and Bears Avenue and increased by greater amounts on Fowler and Busch Boulevard. I would note in these numbers here that Fletcher, as a 4-lane facility, handles 44,000 vehicles per day on average. Fowler, an 8-lane facility, handles only 10,000 more vehicles per day, even under this. And Busch, a 6-lane facility, handles 52,000, or about 8,000 more vehicles per day. So Fletcher is handling a large volume of traffic for the size of the roadway it is. Looking at the pedestrian and bicycle crossings data, you do have 83 to 96% compliance of those mid-block crossings, depending on which crossing you're talking about. So the low was 83% of pedestrians are complying with those controlled mid-block crossings, up to 96% at the high. Looking at the average speeds along the project boundaries. One of the reasons you see the wavy lines in the right-hand picture is because of a different methodology for measuring that. They're a little more flattened out and averaged out, but the general thing to look here is that, yes, there are people slowing down for each of those mid-block crossings, and that when you have a generally flat speed going through that corridor, it causes people to slow down more, and people do slow down to allow those crossings to take place. The same thing is true in the westbound direction. You still see those slowdowns to allow people to cross. So the travel time data on the eastbound AM peak, which is the predominant direction, the travel time actually declined an average of 21 seconds. In the AM, which is a surprise considering that the overall speed of the corridor slowed down. The AM peak westbound takes 3 seconds longer as a result, or after the improvements were completed. There's no predominant direction in midday peak, although the percent difference is an 8% increase. In the PM peak westbound, it is an 87-second average increase, which is about 1.5 minutes. So that is some time, but as we get into the safety improvements as a result of that, I hope you'll agree that it's worth it. The westbound directional travel time increased by 31 seconds, excuse me. So looking at the crash analysis, the major one that was a reduction here after is the 62 left turn crashes. That is a reduction of 48% in those left turn crashes. Those are major injury crashes, people taking a left turn in front of oncoming traffic, and will result in some of the safety improvements that we see. The overall average crash rate was only down 4%. Now, when we look at severe crashes, we had 46 non-incapacitating injuries. That is a reduction of 37% from the 3 years before the improvements were made. 20 incapacitating injuries, that is a reduction of 46% from the 3 years before the improvements were made. And 2 fatalities, which is a reduction from the 5 fatalities, or a reduction of 60% in the fatality rate for this corridor before and after the project was constructed. So bike ped crashes, they actually did increase by 6 total. The volumes increased by 13% total, 186 additional crossings per day. And the non-incapacitating injuries were reduced by 10%, that's 20 versus 18. Incapacitating injuries were reduced by 18%, and fatalities were reduced by 50%. So while there was an increase in total crashes, the severity of those crashes has declined as a result of these improvements, is the takeaway. So in conclusion, the average volumes have increased on Fletcher Avenue since the completion, but at a lower rate than parallel roadways. The speeds of vehicles have decreased within the study segment, and average travel times have increased. The pedestrian and bicyclist volumes along the corridor also increased, and a majority of those pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles are utilizing the installed improvements properly, particularly the rapid flashing beacons. Overall, the total number of crashes was reduced, as well as the severity, and there was an increase in pedestrian and bicycle crashes. However, the additional volume, the crash rate has decreased for pedestrians and cyclists, and the severity of those crashes was reduced within that project area. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on the projects.
Any questions?
Thank you
Okay,
all.
thank you.
So that is a great example of what we could do with our surtax funding when we get it. These are a little bit more expensive projects, the complete streets redesign. This next presentation points out some more
Commissioner Kemp has a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I just thought it was an excellent presentation. I was really pleased to get it. And I just thought it was, even though it's a small amount, pretty much AM and PM travel, at least both the PM travel, eastbound and westbound, and the AM, you actually increased the speed at which people arrived, which is in a few seconds. But, we always hear, oh, this is going to slow down if you take, any notice of pedestrians, and the amount of severe crashes and fatalities that you were able to, that this shows that has been reduced without even impacting, in fact, allowing people to arrive someplace faster, is I think pretty astonishing, numbers, stats.
And I would note that even when there is a delay for people traveling along that corridor, it has been relatively minor compared to the safety benefits that have been seen there.
And just one more, the left-hand turn was which I always think is utterly the most dangerous. It's probably proved by the traffic engineering stats. So the left-hand turn, the reduction in those severe crashes with left-hand turns happened because?
So where there was an uncontrolled sort of middle fifth lane, sometimes people refer to that as a suicide lane, where people can just make a left turn into any driveway along the route, those have been channelized so that some of those left turns are prohibited, and they're at locations where people cannot come nose to nose with each other, and the locations for those left turns are channelized. So people are expecting where those left turns are being made, and using those facilities is my understanding of why that.
Thank you for the further information.
Okay, Ms.
No,
Doris.
that's great. Good observations. So I'm going to bring up the DOT to talk about their Busch Boulevard study, which really gets at what Commissioner Smith had said a little bit more about those low-hanging fruit and what you can do in a shorter time frame with a little less cost than some of the other projects or improvements or countermeasures that Fletcher had on it. So Peter Shue, you can traffic safety engineer.
I will mention Peter Shue, FDOT District Safety Program Engineer. Good morning, Chair, Commissioner, Mayor, and board member. Before I talk about Busch Boulevard, I want to tell you some good news. So for Fletcher Avenue, on March 16, 9 o'clock, if you are free, please join with DOT and county to welcome a very, very high-level US DOT official. They're going to use Fletcher Avenue to talk to the nation about how to address pet-bike safety. So I will go to best to send the invitation to all of you. Second good news, I want to tell you, we saw the presentation from Johnny about 2019 is a terrible year for Hillsborough County. But as I'm the guy tracking those fatalities every day. So as for the month of January for this year, compared with same time last year, I have great news to you. We reduced more than 15% in New York County. Overall, in District 7, we reduced more than 30% just for the month of January. I'm hoping this pattern will continue. So I will talk about another happy news about Busch Boulevard, the safety improvement we're doing from Delmarva to 56th Street for the past 8 months. This is a fast-track project, really initiated by our Secretary Gwen. Everybody know this is a Busch Boulevard. It's a principal arterial, and also from the land use side, you can tell from DOT category, it's called suburban residential, commercial, or urban general. From the way, as a safety engineer, when I deal with safety, I need to balance between safety and operation. We covered this one in previous presentation. Also, the way I handle safety, we mentioned on Fletcher Avenue too. We use 3E, engineering, education, and enforcement. And I'm going to show you what we have done along Busch Boulevard. First thing for education, we have Bywalk Tampa Bay program. Most of you should hear the presentation from Bywalk Tampa Bay handled by USF Carter a while ago. We have a launch marketing campaign throughout the Busch Boulevard last year. Based on this campaign, we outreached to few hundred pedestrians, even driver and biker too. So you can see the data here. For enforcement, I need to say thank you to my secretary, Gwen, again. He allocated $100,000 to Hillsborough County Sheriff and TPD to conduct the speed enforcement. Just for Busch Boulevard, for the start from May to end of last year, you can see we stopped so many cars. We talked to so many bikers and pedestrians too. And you can see the front photo. We did have a people, TPD people, doing the enforcement right around Mel Hot Dog area. And later, from the short-term engineering scene action, I need to tell you, just for Busch Boulevard, we have been using technology. We have a protected left turn on Chamberlain High School. We extend walk time to address the teenager crossing the road safely. Also, we start to put on this speed feedback sign, just as you can see from this photo. Later, we just want to let you know, after District 7 start this speed feedback sign program, the rest of the state, every DOT district, they are copying us. They are doing everywhere too. And later, I need to say thank you for the teamwork we have with City of Tampa. We work with TICO to improve the street lighting over there. They changed from the old high-pressure soldering light, not visible, to very, very bright LED street light. And later, I just want to let you know, we finished a resurfacing project last October along West Busch Boulevard. Under this project, this have a two-way left-hand lane. We just talked about just similar to Fletcher Avenue. Under that particular project, we reduced lane width on West Busch Boulevard from 12 to 11 feet. We also add a raised island and separator. And really, we break the continuation of this two-way left-hand lane. We also provide refuge for the pedestrian to cross the road. From the photo on the top right, you can tell I am so happy we're seeing the pedestrian is really crossing the road safely right now with Refuge Island. And you probably will ask us, would those Refuge Island create an impact to business owner for their driveway, the in and out traffic? From this photo, you can tell they can get in and out easily without any impact. And just from the speed feedback sign data we receive, I can tell you the trend is changing. Based on 85 percentile speed limit, you can tell between 2018 and 19, it's changing. And also, just for Busch Boulevard, we are also using signal timing scale we call content clarification. Basically, we try to look at the timing and to really control the speed. That's just being implemented. We don't know the answer yet. And later, for I talk about West Busch Boulevard, you probably say, how about East Busch Boulevard? I just want to tell you, we are doing the pedestrian hyper beacon. We are going to install 4 pedestrian hyper beacon along East Busch Boulevard at 12 Brooks, Pawnee, and Overlook. You can tell the shape of this pedestrian, the hyper beacon. This is the product really introduced by Federal Highway from the west side of the United States. They think this is another good product to address pet bike safety. And I just want to show you a typical way, how do you look at the pedestrian hyper beacon. We can look at the typical sample we show over here at Busch Overlook. And later, I just want to show you how is the performance of the pedestrian hyper beacon. 5 years ago, we installed 3 pedestrian hyper beacon along East Hillsborough Avenue. Based on the evaluation we have been doing, you can tell the number of crashes dropped significantly. I can tell you those number over here and the photo over here have been used by Federal Highway for the whole nation. Just for Florida, they conduct 21 workshops to teach the people in Florida how to address pet bike safety. The table and photo was used just for Florida. And later, they outreach to probably 200 other workshops nationwide. They're using our data. I just want to tell you, District 7, we are really advanced in safety. And for the West Busch Boulevard, I need to let you know, we have a midterm action. We have a common corridor improvement project. Our target is to drop the speed from 45 to 35. And later, under this project, we're going to totally remove the two-way left-turn lane. We're going to really install the raised island. Also, we will fill the sidewalk gap. And also, we will install one more pedestrian hyper beacon at West Busch and the North Rome Circle. Plus, we're going to change the curve radii at Nebraska and West Busch. But we, DOT need your help. We have the design funding allocated, but we do not have any construction funding allocated. I'm hoping in the near future, DOT can work with you to move this project up. You probably say, hey, Peter, you have been talking about so many actions. What is the benefit we are looking at? Good news, West Busch Boulevard. We are, based on the data we have, all the action we have been doing, 3E, education, enforcement, and raise median, change the 12 feet to 11 feet. Based on our data, we show the average speed drop 4.5 miles. We are in the process to reduce the speed limit for West Busch Boulevard from 45 to 40. Mayor, I just want to tell you, we team up with your chief of police. We are dropping the speed along 56th Street south of Fowler from 45 to 42. So I just want to tell you, we are working.
Wrong mayor.
Yeah. And later, I just want to say because you can tell this is an action is not only engineering. We need to use 3E approach. And just for East Busch Boulevard, you probably say, what's going on? And we, as I said, pedestrian hyper beacon, that will come in. The project was led, $1.3 million project was led in December. Construction should start sometime in March, hopefully sometime this year. We will finish installing those 4 PHB, pedestrian hyper beacon. Based on our experience along East Hillsborough Avenue, we are expected to drop the speed at least 5 miles per hour and reduce lots of crashes a year. So I'm open for any question.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you. And Gina may help with this question, but Peter, if you could go back on the slide where you have the contact classifications, I think you have 3.
Yep.
So my question related to this is, we all kind of know the scope of Busch Boulevard and how it changes from Dale Mabry to Temple Terrace, but are you at a point where you would be able to show on the corridor where exactly you're applying that 3CR, 3C C, and C4? Because
Easy. Gina can give the info to you. Everything's in the GIS map. We have GIS map sheet. They have it. You can see exactly where's your home located, wherever C1 to C6.
so then my question is, for other streets that have, or other corridors that have the same classification, would you, the fact that you had success with these projects on Busch and success on Fletcher, can those now be incorporated onto those other streets without having to go through the same study process that now that you've proven that it works on Fletcher and Busch? Could you say, okay, well, it worked on Fletcher, it could work on Waters, or it worked on Busch, now we can apply it to MLK?
You probably heard there's education, enforcement short term. But for Busch Boulevard, you heard that we have a construction project. For West Busch Boulevard, we are so lucky we have resurfacing project really led sometime early summer last year. And during those time, we say we're going to change the two-way left-hand lane at this refugee island to really block the continuation. People use the two-way left-hand lane as a bypass lane. So we are lucky. But for East Busch Boulevard, you heard that we need to program a pedestrian hyper beacon project. But for other corridor, counting on education enforcement is all short time. We need to physically change the roadway geometric to make it happen. So we are working very, very hard with MPO, everybody to work together. And one of the things that I need to say thank you to our secretary, he hold a meeting with all the leadership in District 7, say, District 7, we have so many resurfacing projects in coming year. How can we use those projects to address something similar like what we're talking about, easy to implement? So we're looking at those things because generate a project from my side is not easy. But if somebody else generate, we can work together to implement safety.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kemp, you recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, again, the presentation was very well done and very enlightening. One thing that you did say is about a lack of funding, or else we could do more. Thank you, Secretary Gwen, for, as he stated, looking at the repaving as an opportunity. And my question is, when that slide went by very quickly, I thought you said Nebraska and Busch when you were talking about that, both which are FDOT roads. So I'm just wondering, from Secretary Gwen or Beth, what we might do in trying to somehow get the funding to speed up some of these projects that we just talked about. What can we do as an MPO?
That is actually a great segue into our next month. We're having a workshop on this board's priorities. And so we are already talking with the District 7 staff about some potential projects that could improve safety that we can bring back to you.
Great, thank you.
So I just want to reiterate that some of these shorter-term things that Peter pointed out for 0 to 2 years are the kinds of projects that we're going to be working with Hillsborough County. We're about to kick off looking at the 8 corridors on that top 20 corridor high injury network that are the county's responsibility. And those are the types of treatments and others that we really are hoping to recommend at the end of those studies. So there's good stuff coming, and thank you, I guess, really, the commission for asking the MPO to help the county with that. So the final presentation that you all had really directed our staff to develop a speed management action plan, and it's really hard to put your head around how, how do you start locating where those corridors are that speed was an issue in the high crashes, and how do you start prioritizing those and putting, some treatments towards those? I think we've got a great consultant that helped us come up with some answers to those challenging questions. So Paula, if you want to come up here, it's Paula Flores.
Good morning, Paula Flores with Graham Peterson, and glad to be here assisting the MPO in Hillsborough County, trying to reduce the number of fatalities and serious injuries we have in our network system today. So today I'm going to go through what we've been up to since we were retained last spring to address the speed management action plan, to address how do we control speed or manage speed on especially the high injury network. So I'm going to go real quickly through why, what, and how, because I think most of you have already heard this. We've got a serious problem, so let's get to it. I'm going to talk more about the study status and where we are, and then the next steps, where we're going to wrap this up. So real quickly, we know this is different probably from some of the prior presentations you've heard. This study is going to be spoken through the lens of Vision Zero, which is a very assertive program. You can call it aggressive program, so we can actually start targeting to reach zero. So, and it was part of the original Vision Zero action plan that we were not just going to look at education and enforcement, but also look at the engineering, DE. So this study resulted from one of the goals that was identified in the Vision Zero action plan. There you go. So why is this important? I think we all know. We are one of the deadliest, I say, one of the deadliest state in the nation when it comes to pedestrian and bicycle facilities, fatalities in all of the nation here. And I'm not dwelling on that because we have a lot of work to do, so let's get to it. You know, and on average, just here in Hillsborough County, you know, there's a person dying on our streets every other day. And, you know, as long as that continues, we're not done and we're not working fast enough or hard enough to really curtail that. So some of the data that came out of the Vision Zero action plan is the basis of where we're starting off and leaping up from. You know, and it talked about 75% of the fatal crashes occurring on the roads with posted speeds of 40 miles an hour and over, or how 75% of all the fatal serious injury crashes occurred on 1/3 of the roads, and so forth. And that's how the top 20 corridors were identified. So 1/3 of all the roads account for 3/4 of all the fatal crashes in the county. So we started with these top 20 corridors as a basis, and it will be the testing ground really for the speed management action plan that we're undertaking. And I want to stop and pause to ask, you know, managing speed is critical. Speeding kills more than 10,000 people per year, on par with drunk driving, you know, but doesn't carry that same social consequences that we hear all the time when there is a fatality on our streets. 30% of all fatal crashes nationwide are due to speeding. You know, and the societal cost is huge, $40 billion annually. It is a national problem across the country, across North America, across the world in some places. But the effective solutions have to be done here locally. But I also wanted to talk about, it's not just about speed. It's about aggressive driving behaviors. So we really have to broaden that description to talk about you don't necessarily have to be driving really fast or very fast if you're causing your aggressive behaviors are causing crashes to occur in our systems. Speed, however, is critical because, as all of you know, and we've seen a lot of these graphs in other presentations, is that the chances of a pedestrian, for example, which is a vulnerable user or a cyclist, being hit and killed at 20 miles an hour is relatively low. It's less than 20%. But at 40 miles an hour and higher, it's steeply increased. Close to 75 to 80% will die if hit at 40 miles an hour. So that is a huge discernible difference as to why speed does matter when we're talking about managing speed on our streets. And that's because of a couple factors. One, think about it, it's the cone of vision. Put yourself behind a wheel and think about it at 20 miles an hour, your visibility, your peripheral vision. When you're driving that low speed, you could see a lot happening near you, around you, on the sidewalk, the cyclist, or other drivers. The moment you're driving at 40 miles an hour, your cone of vision is significantly tighter. You're really focusing on just keeping that car going straight. So your periphery vision is very small. But what that does is that you also, if there's a chance that something is in your way or behaving differently than the norm, your reaction time is significantly slower. So again, speed does matter. And actually, according to Vision Zero, we had Leah Shaham here a couple of months ago, and she said that the national sweet spot for safe operations is in the 20 to 25 miles an hour. That's the sweet spot of where we should be targeting speeds on most of our roads outside of freeways. So the study objectives, our number one goal, of course, it is to improve public health and safety by reducing road fatalities and serious injuries. We had established some desired outcomes: improve safety experience, increase awareness of what is happening and the dangers of speeding and aggressive driving behavior, institutionalizing good practices. And I think this was asked, how do you take some of the lessons learned that we see not just here in Hillsborough County, but across the nation and across North America? How do we make sure that then our policies in every agency, if it's at the state level, at the county level, at the city level, is working towards those means? How do you identify supportive policies, programs, or infrastructure that's necessary to carry through and meet these goals? And then, of course, cooperation and support from all the stakeholders, all the agencies that are involved, because this is an NPO overarching study. We rely heavily on all the other agencies that they operate and maintain these facilities. So our Speed Management Action Plan had 5 tasks. I'm going to go through these really quickly here now. Task 1 was stakeholder engagement. We've had 2 major meetings. The partners and stakeholders are on the left side of your screen, from the MPO to the county to the school district, the cities, law enforcement, and even Thea and Hart and the health department have been involved in those meetings. The task 2, the practices, we've done our homework on some of the speed management practices across the country and across the world, FHWA practices that are available, and we've identified some of the practices that are already being, that are operational here in Florida, and we've already heard some of those treatments already discussed earlier presentations. Speed management, though, it's very broad. It's not just about engineering. It's about a lot of things. It is data-driven, which I must emphasize. It is about, but looking at not just crash data, but looking at the roadway characteristics about the users, the land use data, and so forth that has been brought up already. It's applying road design and traffic operations and safety measures across. It's talking about setting appropriate, rational, desirable, safe speed limits. It's not just about what the 85th percentile speed is on a roadway and how people are using it today, but really establishing what is it that it should be based on the context class of the area. Again, institutionalizing, good practices, enforcement, and so forth. So, nationally, we've seen campaigns about speed matters most. It does. It's critical. If we can't manage speed on our streets, then we're never going to get to zero. And we've seen communities across the country taking an aggressive approach at reducing speed limits. In 2017, there was a National Traffic Safety Board study that said that 85th percentile speed setting leads to actually unintended consequences of higher operating speeds and undesirable cycle and speed escalation and reduced safety. So nationally, there's a huge conversation about eliminating the 85th percentile speed setting as the only way to establish speed limits on our streets. And there are other methods. U.S. Limits 2 is another consideration that other communities are aggressively using instead of using 85th percentile speed. And there's also this new Vision Zero approach, which is the safe systems approach, which is we know the context of our streets. We should have values to determine what is the target speed that we're trying to achieve in these corridors instead of going by the 85th percentile speed. Other cities that I wish I was part of their revolution in tackling Vision Zero. Seattle, the Bostons, New York City, Mexico City, and a whole bunch of other cities have already taken the leap of faith forward to say we are going to determine that our city and the lives in our communities are much more important than the ability of somebody to get somewhere faster, and have lowered speed limits to 25 miles an hour on arterials, 20 miles an hour on non-arterials. And they have been successful, and the reports are coming in, and they are making inroads. So with that said, one of the first steps that I took was to look at the top 20 corridors in Hillsborough County. And we looked at the road classification, we looked at the context classification, context classification. We looked at then one of the leading sources on speed management, ITE and CNU, that report on that had actually put a publication together called Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares, a context-sensitive approach back in 2010, which talks about context speed. And we compared these context speeds to the actual posted speeds that we have on the top 20 quarters. And what I found was not surprising, only because I've already driven so much up and down all of these quarters, and I feel that they're out of context. So what we found out was that 70% of all the top 20 quarters are at least, the posted speed are at least 5 to 10 miles an hour over national best practice. And an additional 15% are 15 to 20 miles an hour above. And what I want to tell you is that I'm only comparing posted speeds, not running speeds. We did not, as part of this study, have the sources to go ahead and get the running speeds on these. So, and we all know that running speeds are at least 10 miles an hour above the posted speed. So if the posted speed, according to the context of the top 20 deadliest quarters in Hillsborough County, are already way too high. So I urge that would be one of the things that we really seriously have to take a look at, and what is it that we can do to change it. And yes, I hear a lot of conversations that you can't just simply change the speed and in fact change in behavior. And I agree with that, but we have to start somewhere. And when you start with the speed setting, it then allows for the engineering to design at the lower speed level instead of the higher ones that are currently there. One piece of news that just came out within the last couple of weeks is that NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, is actually developing a manual on how to do safe speed study. And this is the first risk matrix that they've already made public about talking about doing speeds according to high activity, moderate activity, low activity across conflict. High conflict, moderate, or low conflict. But one of the amazing things is that even where you have low conflict and low activity happening on a road, the max speed on this table does not exceed 35 miles an hour for local roads, arterial roads, and local roads. Freeways exempted from this. So there's a lot of work going on at the national level, and we hope to roll in the latest and greatest information that are getting from a lot of these organizations into the study. So speed management, again, it's not just, design, of course. There's a lot of countermeasures that we can be used. These are not new. They've been around, in our hands, in our toolbox for a long time, from road diets, road narrowing, speed humps, roundabouts. There's a huge list listed on here, and these are only a handful of them. But we also need to talk about intelligent transportation systems, driver feedback signs that we heard being applied on Fletcher and Busch and others, install signals that maintain an orderly progression. We got a slide, I loved it, Peter, about, managing speed through our signal coordination systems. You can do that effectively and actually reduce speeds or manage speeds along a corridor. Rest and red signals and all sorts of other technology that have been applied successfully in other quarters to try to keep speed going at the target speed. We can also need to consider potentially more assertive, more aggressive, supportive enforcement techniques, automated speed enforcement, which is something we don't have. Automated red light cameras, we have those, but we need more, especially on some of these high injury corridors. Targeted enforcement on high crash corridors, which I know we've been doing some of that already locally. Higher fines for speeding on high crash corridors. Radar and laser speed monitoring and feedback and aerial enforcement. So we have a list of all sorts of different tools that even on the enforcement side should be integrated and further considered where appropriate. So this is going to be the interesting part. So task 3 was to, of course, Hillsborough County, we have a lot of terrible corridors, and how do you prioritize? Where do you start on some of these corridors? So we started taking a look at them. During one of our stakeholder meetings, we asked this question to all those agencies that were in the room. And here's a list of all the things they wanted us to consider when prioritizing corridors, from Posted speed versus context class, regional equity was an issue, crash history, proximity to schools, pet bike injuries, and the list goes on. And at the bottom, we added a couple other things. Transit service route, which infers if you have transit corridor, you have more vulnerable users, higher risks, and then geometric features, volumes, lanes, and intersection spacing as other metrics. So we started looking at the high injury network, high crash statistics of all top 20. We looked at the data between the year 2014 and 2018, 5 years of full year data. We started looking at what all of these corridors had in common. And over the course of the years, as compared to prior year when the Vision Zero action plan was performed, for example, total crashes have increased by 13%. Fatalities decreased slightly. Serious injuries had decreased by 30%, which is notable. Motorcycle crashes decreased by 10%. Pedestrian crashes was interesting because it increased by 10%, but pedestrian fatalities actually increased, which means the severity of those crashes had increased. And bicycle crashes reduced by 5%, but bicycle fatalities and serious injuries actually decreased significantly. So we've already seen a change, even just the data set from the prior Vision Zero action plan data that we had. We started looking at other interesting characteristics. Frequency by age. 67% of fatal crashes involved 35-year-old people that were 35 years old or younger, which suggests that we really should start looking at educational programs targeted for more younger drivers. Posted speeds, of course, we already knew this. Most of the corridors and most of the fatalities all happen on higher speed crash corridors. Non-intersection, 60% almost of all the fatal crashes occurred at non-intersection location. So the mid-block crossings are important. Not something to be ignored, but something to be refocused on. Aggressive driving, and I wanted to bring this up, aggressive driving, not just speed-related factors. 71% of all fatal crashes in this time frame included erratic, reckless driving, aggravated maneuvers, ran off the road, exceeded speed limit, ran red light, careless, or negligent. So I don't want to just focus on which ones were directly related to speed, but all of these other aggressive behaviors. Time of day, somebody had asked, 83% of all the fatal crashes occur non-peak. So it's not just about rush hour. It's about what is happening on these corridors when it's not rush hour, when we have less traffic on these roads and we still have significant amount of travel lanes. So hence, people are probably driving faster, more carelessly, and causing fatal crashes. So while during rush hour, it's very important that we also minimize those crashes for travel time reliability, which was also mentioned earlier. That's critical, but we also have to focus what happens when it is not rush hour. Number of lanes, vehicle type, there's also a national conversation about larger vehicles having a significant input or share in the type of fatality crashes we have. For example, fatal crashes involve 43% in cars, 24% by SUVs, and 14% by motorcycles. So we started to look some of those factors. We then looked at communities of concern. That was one of the metrics, and we got mapping from the MPO. We looked at overlay the overall high injury network. We estimated distances and frontages of each of these corridors on these different categories. We assigned a point system. We tried to figure out, if you're talking seriously about equity, then let's take a look at how many of these corridors are in these areas of concern. So we developed a risk performance level. The higher the deviations, the higher the number of points, so the higher the risk, and hence that corridor would get higher points than others that traversed non-communities of concern. We also looked at, like I mentioned, transit service routes, for example. We overlaid the high injury networks. We identified how many of these corridors had service on them, or how many of them actually traversed through these corridors. We identified them. We identified if there was transfer centers or park and ride lots really close to some of these corridors and so forth. And again, we assigned a point system, developed a performance level. The higher the service provider, the higher the points, the higher the risk. So we did all of these. We included the crash severity miles, the ped bike crash rates, the schools per mile, equity component of it, the posted speed versus context class conflict that I talked about first, transit routes, high volumes, and we measured the top 20. And what we found out is that even though they're shown on this table in order, according to the Vision Zero action plan, when we accommodate or look at all these other factors, how to prioritize these corridors, the order changes drastically. So the top contenders that need the most attention, the ones that got the highest points, became the Brandon Boulevards, became the Hillsborough Avenue, became the Fletchers, which we've already talked, a portion of it is already being addressed, the Dale Mabry's, the Bruce B. Downs, Sheldon, Kennedy, and Florida Avenue. So what's next? So when we got to this point, we met with FDOT, we met with the county, and we shuffled around the scope, and they said, well, these are great. We're working already on some of these corridors, overlapping and so forth. What's the next 30? What are the next level of corridors that we needed? So we went back to our office and we started to look this again. So how do you define the next group of 30, and how do you prioritize them as well? So this is where we are, people. The light blue is the serious injury heat map. The red dots are actually where all the fatal crashes have occurred across the county from January 24th till December 2018. And if I was at my computer and I zoomed in, you could tell that these dots, especially the red dots, overlap coincidentally with all our major arterials in the county. So we identified the next 30 using the same process as the first 20, and here they are. The blue in the map are the existing top 20 corridors of high injury network, and the green are the next level of 30. And these are huge. You're talking about Bloomingdale Avenue, MLK, Hillsborough Avenue right now is only a portion of it is in the top 20, but either side of it is just as bad, if not worse. We got US 41, you got more freeway segments in here, you got a lot of corridors. This covers our entire county. So we did the same thing. We went through that matrix talking about crash severity, schools per mile, equity, and so forth, and we came up with a ranking again. And the only surprise that I saw in the data was it's more of the same. It's the high speeds, it's the high crashes, it's the high travel lanes and volumes on some of these corridors. And the corridors that are shown in yellow at the right-hand side, we have, which are Bloomingdale, US 301, Busch Boulevard, a different section, Waters, which was a surprise to me, and Fowler Avenue, they're actually rated higher than some of the corridors that are on the top 20 right now. So that was kind of a surprise and something that we may be able to accelerate. But this, we just finished this past weekend, actually. So we're going to be looking through these a little bit more in detail. We're going to be cleaning this up and making sure that we didn't miss something, and proceeding on to the next step. The next step is wrapping this up. So we've looked at data, we've told you what the problems are, we've identified the corridors, we've identified a priority way to look at some of these corridors and how to get to them faster, but now we have to tell you and show you in this plan some of the strategies and countermeasures. Some of them have been shown in some of these examples that have already been presented to you today, but we have a lot more that we can integrate in here, including policy issues that we have to tackle in terms of how you set speeds, to access management principles in urban areas versus more suburban areas, or other elements. So we still have work to do over the next few months to try to pull this together and wrap it up, and we're looking forward to getting that draft action plan to everybody and our agency partners as well to review in the next few months. That's it.
Can be recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for the excellent presentation. I wish we had more time to go into it more deeply, but one of my fast takeaways will just be that seeing that New York, but Nashville and all these other places have reduced their deaths, and that NATCO nationally is looking at how to do this. And so I'm so glad we're on the cutting edge of looking at this, and thank you so much for all that information.
Mr. Smith, shortly, we got to get out of here.
Yes, very quick, because similarly, because we are short on time, I can't list everything I've gotten out of all 3 status reports, but I want to thank MPO and the staff and the consultant, as well as the Mr. Peters, who was before, for 3 eye-opening, very informative reports that with some surprises to take away that can actually inform some of our policy decisions, as well as the capital improvements that we do going forwards and our budget decisions. So thank you very much for a very meaty set of presentations.
Just wanted to suggest that we will bring this as action to probably maybe the policy committee, where we can spend a little more time if needed. It'll go through the committees after it goes to our stakeholders.
Thank you.
Thank you. Executive Director's report.
Thank you, sir, and thank you all for your patience this morning, and very much for the leadership that you all have continued to show on bringing safety to the forefront. And I look forward to working with you to take the next step this year. Our first week of March will be a busy one. We have our board meeting on March the 3rd. On Thursday, March the 5th, there is going to be a tour of Sunrail with the Heart Board, so I'd encourage you to RSVP for that if you're available. And then on Friday of that week, we do have the TMA Leadership Group meeting, and we will be talking there about adding the Tampa Streetcar project onto that TMA priority list. The board workshop on managed lanes that you all requested in December. We found some great speakers to bring to you, in addition to the gentleman from Stantec, who's working with the Expressway Authority on case studies. We've also reached out to Todd Littman with the Victoria Transport Policy Institute, who's done some great work on what pricing means for smart growth, and also how do you integrate concerns for equity and balance everyone's needs in the community. We've also reached out to the Northern Virginia Regional Council, where they have been implementing, using toll revenue, some expanded transit service. We may have to bump out that meeting date, though, so I'll have to get back with you with potentially a later date. And then March 24th, we do have our workshop on TIP priorities. That will be across the hall, so unfortunately we will not be able to televise that meeting, but we will take good notes. And then finally, following up on Mayor Lott's comments about when we like to see more construction, we are about to see some major construction on I-275 in the next couple of years, and I think we're going to hear from DOT in just a moment about the next steps on that I-275 project. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, or good morning. Roger Roscoe with FDOT staff. Very, very briefly, in your packets, we have a public notice regarding the Tampa Interstate study, the supplemental environmental impact statement. We're going to be having 2 public hearings taking place in the month of February. The first one will be Tuesday, February 25th, from 5 until 7:30 p.m. The first one will be at the Hillsborough Community College Dale Mabry campus, the Student Services Building, 4001 West Tampa Bay Boulevard, Tampa 33614. The formal presentation will officially begin at 6 p.m. and we'll be able to go ahead and leave public comment. We'll have our FDOT staff there to go ahead and talk with any of our people that do show up for that night. So we hope you all will make attendance for that one. And session 2 will be on Thursday, February 27th at Port Tampa Bay Cruise Terminal, number 6. We very much appreciate the port allowing us to be there again. We appreciate that. Again, that's going to be at 1331 McKay Street, Tampa 33602, from 5 to 7:30 p.m., Terminal 6. from 5 to 7:30 p.m., the open house. The formal presentation, again, will begin at 6 p.m. Again, we'll have court reporters at both of these events, so we'll allow you to go ahead and leave a public comment. And for any additional information on this, you can go out to tampainterstatestudy.com. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
And board members, the last thing is that I'll be presenting forms to each of the board members for the executive director's annual evaluation later this month, and I'll be presenting those to you in your April meeting. Thank you.
Okay. So any other business coming for us today? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just for the March 24th meeting, I don't think we have mentioned it yet, but transportation demand management, I know our organization is working on programs related to the 275 interchange, but for areas that may not get transit, if we could talk TDM and somehow incorporate in what the status are of the projects coming up or what projects may already exist.
Thank you. I'll have our TIP manager reach out to you.
Any other business coming for us today? Seeing none, we adjourn.